What's up guys? So I recently reviewed the Motorola Edge S and I didn't really go in depth into the camera system because I wanted to compare it to the Poco F3, which is considered the mid-range flavor of the month right now. On paper they have very similar camera systems, both similar sized main sensors, no optical image stabilization on neither of those, so they should perform similarly on paper. So let's see what the real-life performance is. We're going to start with the main camera samples under decent lighting conditions. So let's dig in. So with this first photo, we're actually going to notice a pattern that will continue throughout the whole video. About the colors. Motorola seems to be a bit on the colder side. I think it's the HDR that kicks in and flattens the image to preserve dynamic range, while the Poco F3 actually has more vibrant, deeper colors on their photos, pretty much with a couple exceptions, but it's general rule that will apply throughout the whole video. Not a lot to talk about here, pretty much very similar sized main sensors and very similar photo in the end. Moving on, this is actually the photo that I prefer the look of the Poco F3. While the sky is a little bit too blue for my liking on the Poco F3, it seems to handle the pretty tough conditions of the reflections on the statue a lot better. It doesn't blow out the highlight that much as with the Motorola Edge S, and the detail on the trees in the background seems to be a lot better on the Poco as well. This is an interesting photo because I think both of these devices missed the contrast quite a bit. It's probably the HDR that kicked in and tried to flatten the image on the Motorola Edge S, but as you can see, the triangle shape of the roof, it was pretty much black in real life, and it really flattened it way too much. It's way too bright, as well as the front of the building. It's brighter than in real life, while the Poco F3 actually darkened it a lot more than what it really was. Detail-wise, I think they're very similar, but in general, the Poco F3 is probably closer to how the building looked in real life. Next up is another photo that looks pretty similar on both of these devices. As you can see, the dynamic range is pretty much on par. If you look at the shadow on the building on the right side, the detail in the shadows is pretty much the same. I do prefer the look of the Poco here. The blue comes a little more vibrant to me, and actually, while I didn't like it on the sky in the previous pictures, here I think it really helps to make the photo look better. It looks pretty flat and kind of uninteresting on the Motorola Edge S. So in general, I think Poco definitely handled this situation better. Okay, next up is the close subject photo to show the bokeh quality. And this is pretty much reversed from the previous one because I think it looks a lot better on the Motorola Edge S here. It seemed to preserve the detail in the leaves a lot better, and the subject separation also worked quite a bit better. Poco F3 had some trouble focusing in the middle parts of the scene. The one leaf is in focus while the one next to it is kind of blurred out. I think it kind of missed the focus there. So this photo for me definitely looks better on the Motorola Edge S. The bokeh quality is pretty much on par. Again, the colors are a bit more vibrant on the Poco F3, but this is pretty subjective. Next up is the portrait photo, and this is an interesting one. For some reason, Motorola Edge S really missed the mark here with the colors. It's some kind of yellow tint. If you look at both photos side by side, they look very different, and my baby Yoda looks definitely more like the Poco F3 photo in real life. Again, the Edge S, I don't know what happened here. This is portrait mode, but for some reason the yellow tint is super strong on the body of the Yoda. It should be a lot more brown, just like on the Poco F3. So definitely this photo goes in favor of the Poco F3 by a huge margin. The Motorola Edge S really missed the mark on this one. Next up is the macro. Actually, the Poco F3 is the one that has a dedicated macro camera. The Motorola Edge S doesn't, but it has a time of flight sensor as well as a depth sensor. I think it kind of evens out. The photos look very similar. The minimal focus distance actually was almost identical, which I was really surprised because in theory with the macro camera on the Poco F3 it should be able to focus a bit closer, but it actually didn't. So the photos in the end look very similar. It kind of boils down to the color difference as well as maybe very slightly better detail on the Poco F3. But in general very similar, pretty much similar minimal focus distance, so the macro capabilities on these two devices are very much on par. Next up is the ultrawide camera. The Motorola Edge S actually has a 16 megapixel ultrawide camera, while the Poco F3 has an 8 megapixel one. So higher resolution helps actually quite a bit on the ultrawide photos, so in theory the Edge S should show better detail. And I think it kind of shows in this photo. The detail in the building behind the glass is quite a bit better on the Motorola Edge S. Also the dynamic range is also a bit better. There's quite a bit more detail in the shadows on the Motorola. On both of these devices there is quite a bit of barrel distortion on the edges. The straight lines don't appear very much straight on the edges of the photo, as you can see on the next one, while the tree on the left side is very much a bit round on both of these phones. But in this one actually the Poco F3 shows a bit of a better detail. Maybe I missed the focus a little bit on this photo, but actually the detail looks better on the Poco F3 here. But very much similar. None of these ultrawide cameras are exceptional quality, so you can expect pretty much mediocre quality of the ultrawide on both of these devices. Next up are the zoom photos. I won't go very much in depth because none of these phones have any sort of dedicated zoom cameras, so it's all digital zoom. But let's zoom in a bit and let's see whether it actually makes sense to zoom on the camera, or is it just better to crop from the 1x zoom. So this is the photo that I took, and I'm going to zoom onto the right side into the apples. So let's see which camera has better digital zoom quality. First up is 2x, and it actually looks a bit better on the Poco F3. Next up is the 5x zoom, and here is where it gets pretty interesting. It looks a lot better, just really a lot better on the Motorola Edge S. Sharpness on the F3 is not very much there. Everything is very soft. So now let's see how the 5x quality compares to just cropping from a 1x photo. So on both of these phones, the 5x zoom quality is actually quite a bit better than cropping from the 1x photo, so that's good. That means the digital zoom kind of works. Like I said, much better on the Edge S than the Poco F3, but neither of those are exceptional. I wouldn't really go past 5x zoom on neither of those phones. So if you really have to take a zoom photo, just go 5x zoom max. Next up, let's move on to some low light photos. None of these phones have big main sensors, so they don't handle low light very well. But on this first photo, as you can see, it comes out quite a bit brighter on the F3. The detail is also a bit better. Let's see how it behaves once we turn on the night mode. So as you can see on both of these devices, there is a noticeable increase in quality once we turn on the night mode, but the Poco F3 I think looks quite a bit better here. The Edge S is not bad, but it's quite a bit softer, especially on the greenery and the tree area. So let's go on to the next one. This one I was actually pleasantly surprised with both of these photos. They're both pretty good. The detail is better on the Poco F3, but I kind of like the colors a bit more on the Edge S. Again, with the Poco, the sky is just too blue. It's too vibrant, but it's kind of subjective. The detail is better on the Poco, the colors, in my opinion, better on the Edge S, but very comparable nonetheless. And here we've got a single low light ultrawide photo. Actually, only the Poco allows us to shoot night mode on the ultrawide camera, so this one is pretty much a landslide. It just looks a lot better on the Poco F3. The Edge S photo is ultra soft, it just doesn't look good. The Poco F3 one is not exceptional, but definitely much better. Okay, this is it when it comes to photos. Let's look at some video quality. Let's go outside and see how both of these perform.
So we are outside now, shooting with the wide lens with both phones. Both phones are at 4K 30 FPS, and you can see how the stabilization works. We have electronic image stabilization only on both phones. It's not the widest angle, but I have the phone quite a bit away from my face, so it should be in frame. And let's switch to the ultra-wide lens, which is probably the more appropriate one for vlogging. Okay, so we are on the ultra-wide now. Unfortunately, neither of those phones allows us to shoot 4K on the ultra-wide camera, so both phones are at 1080p 30 FPS. So expect a noticeable drop in quality. How are the colors? I'm gonna run a little bit, let's see how stable it is. So this is probably what you should expect if you want to vlog with the rear cameras on both of these devices.
Okay, time for a conclusion. I think both of these devices have something that goes in their favor. In general, I tend to prefer the look of the photos coming from the Edge S, but the detail and sharpness is usually on the Poco F3 side. And there's also the low light performance where, with a couple of exceptions where Motorola did put out decent photos, the Poco F3 is generally the better one. So I think it comes down to what you prefer and what is the look of the photos that you like, and that's how you should decide between these two, because they are generally very comparable camera systems. That's it for me for today, guys. If you liked the video and want to support me, make sure to drop the thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one.